Earthlings, welcome along to a special Still Alive. We brought it forward 24 hours to give us a more chance of being still alive than it would have been if we'd have done it on a Tuesday. I think that's
it gave us a day's grace, didn't it?
It gives it a day's chance.
Day's chance to still survive, yeah.
So this is a bit of a special, really, in the sense that we're going to be talking to two of the prime movers from Animal Rising. Now, Ronnie, you're going to make a little bit of say a few words at the beginning.
Yes.
And then we'll get into probably talk about the recent sheep rescue or the lamb rescue. We were talking, weren't we, about when they get killed, because it's leg of lamb, isn't it, rather than leg of sheep? So we talked about.
Oh yes, they're killed. They're killed just a few months old. You know, and this is one thing people don't realise, just how at such a young age animals are killed for humans to eat. Oh
yes, all these all these little babies and juveniles at the best being eaten. So people, welcome along then to Still Alive. Isn't technology wonderful when it works, people? So welcome to our guests as well, in alphabetical order, Orla and Alex, which is my first little joke of the day. So I'm done.
That's hilarious, right? I don't think I'll ever recover from that one.
I'm done now. Yeah, that's it. So Ronnie, do you want to say a few words to start us off?
Yes, it's a great pleasure to have Orla and Alex here. I think there's a lot of great things about Animal Rising. In particular, I think they've done some fantastic actions. The ones that kind of I think I like the best were the McDonald's actions, where they blockaded several of McDonald's depots. I think that was a couple of years ago, and then last September the blockades of the dairy supply depots, and the skill and organisation that went into those actions, I think was absolutely fantastic, and it was brilliant that you were able to carry them out. The other thing I like is the care that Animal Rising shows towards activists. You know, the amount of concern for everyone's well-being and the amount of time that's spent on that. And that's kind of something we've kind of not really seen before in what I might call the animal rights movement, animal liberation movement. You know, there's been some groups in the past that were kind of where the sort of leadership behaved a bit like First World War generals and kind of sending people in and not really, being concerned about what happened to them. I think Animal Rising is totally not like that, and I think that's brilliant. And the third thing is your inclusivity, how you allow people with disabilities to take part in your actions. That's something that's very close to my heart, because my wife Louise is a wheelchair user. Many years ago, she was an activist. She did a lot of direct action. Her mobility over time sort of became less and less, and something very frustrating for her. She could no longer do direct action, something very close to her heart. And Animal Rising, it was then Animal Rebellion, now Animal Rising, enabled her to do that, and she was able to take part in the dairy blockade. She was recently at the calf at the sit-in at the dairy farm, because Animal Rising have been willing to help and include her in the actions. And I think that's absolutely marvelous. And I understand that people that have hearing difficulties, that it's provisions made for those people to take part. And I think that inclusivity is absolutely fantastic, and actually given Louise a new lease of life. Like, as well as being able to do the direct action, it's also made her a much happier person, that she's not frustrated anymore, that she can't do something that's very close to her heart. So there are lots of really brilliant things about Animal Rising. But kind of what concerns me a bit is, and you may know about this if you watched our previous show where Roger and I discussed it. I'm concerned about some of the messaging that kind of follows or accompanies the actions, and that's kind of something that I'm hoping we can have a productive discussion about this evening. And I think obviously the most recent action was the action where the lambs were rescued, which kind of got a lot of media attention, obviously, and I think that's because that's the most the latest, the most recent. That's I think it'd be good to discuss that first. And I think Roger's got a copy of the Animal Rising press release.
I do. Do you want it bigger than that, or is that outline okay for you?
It's
I could put it like this if you want.
Yeah, that's better.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah. So this is well, that's the second picture of the press release. So it starts off. So you nick some animal property from the king. So
yeah.
So are you expecting to be in stocks by next week or something, or what?
Probably be in the tower, I would imagine.
All right. Yeah, with the ravens. So so this is the back of a transit van, I believe. So there was some pushback on the idea of separating the babies from the mothers, wasn't there? So I did notice that on social media, and that seemed to be coming from quite a few quarters. But presumably, I mean, do you know how old the lambs are?
Yeah, maybe I can speak to that. I think the lambs were about 4 months old, and so they had finished weaning. And we know that in the UK, lambs are sent to slaughter between 10 weeks and 6 months. So these lambs would have been very swiftly sent to slaughter. And so, yeah, exactly. And we were there to rescue those lambs and to prevent that from happening. And I think it's important that people know as well that we did try and rescue a mother sheep as well. We tried for hours to rescue a mother sheep, and so this was kind of a last option, rescuing the babies and making that really difficult call.
Yeah, I think there's farmers that cry crocodile tears over these things, aren't there? That say that, oh, isn't it terrible? These lambs were taken from their mothers, as if they kind of really care about the lambs anyway, that they're going to send off for slaughter very shortly.
Yeah, indeed. So, so that we've just got a little kind of description of what happened, and so you were going for a mother and 3 lambs. The mother was obviously into the monarchy, so decided to stay. And then Ronnie, it was Sarah's quotes that you wanted to focus on, right?
Yes, I mean my main concern really about, I mean there are some things in the quote, but my main concern about the messaging from Animal Rising, it was the same with the messaging from Animal Rebellion. My main concern, apart from anything else, is why is there no encouragement to members of the public to go vegan?
Would you like to answer this, Alex, or will I?
Yeah, no, I can answer it, but I might. Is it okay if I sort of go? Roger, I know you're interested in sort of like the research that we've done and used to sort of like shape our messaging. So
yeah, as a social,
like right back
really
to
interested.
Yeah,
go for it.
Yeah, so I mean, we're every social social change theory, every social movement needs a theory of how they want to change the world. So we have a theory of change as well, and that theory of change when we were Animal Rebellion was based upon this top level demands that the government transitions us to a plant-based food system so that our entire nation is essentially goes vegan, because of so it's a systemic change. So we've always been we've always been driving towards essentially a vegan food system, but from a top-down position rather than from an individual change position. And when we were Animal Rebellion, we were always supportive. That's the direction that we wanted to go in. One, because there were many other organisations already doing and focusing quite effectively, really, on individual change, such as Veganuary, for example, and also because we were there to leverage the climate angle for systemic change and quick systemic change, and putting animal agriculture, animal farming and fishing at the centre of the climate crisis conversation. So we've shifted an awful lot. We feel that we've shifted an awful lot of the environmental organisations, Greenpeace, for example, towards awareness of and putting animal agriculture in their messaging. So they have adopted that. When we rebranded and relaunched as Animal Rising, we were still focused very much on, okay, what's our theory of change? And our theory of how social systems change is based on a huge amount of research, and we can get into that later. But it's very much around shifting a large proportion of the population. And so to do that, the research that we've been following, it is like you connect with people's values first, and you align your audience that you're trying to speak to. So actually the general public around the shared value. And that shared value might be compassion, kindness, responsibility, fairness, whatever it might be. And then you identify the problem that's a threat to that value, and then the solution to that. So the solution for us has always been systemic change. So as you see there in our statement there, a commitment to a transition to a safe, secure, plant-based food system and a rewilding program. It's always been a systemic change, because what we want is a shift in the general public to support that systemic change. That's our theory of change. So for us, identifying sort of veganism and its focus on individual change does not align with what we believe our fifth theory of change is. So you can say there, Ronnie, that we're not encouraging people to go vegan, but we are, because we're encouraging the entire country to go vegan from that systemic change point.
Yeah,
that's our theory of change, and that's our approach. Yeah.
Yeah, but you're not. You see, there's a couple of things I'd say to that. In terms of, I mean, to say what you want the government to do, great. There's kind of no harm in saying that. But first of all, I think we've got to accept that this current government isn't going to do any of that, and we've got a government that still promotes the badger cull, despite all the scientific evidence it's not doing any good. We've got a government that's just rejected a package of animal welfare laws. So, how anyone can think that this particular government is going to make any positive moves in bringing in plant-based agriculture, I kind of don't really understand.
Yeah, no, Ronnie, we don't, and that's not our target. When we were Animal Rebellion, we recognised very much that, but making a demand of the government as our sole focus was actually not going to bring us what we wanted. So that's why we shifted to a theory of change that's focused on shifting the hearts and minds of the population.
Yeah, I understand that, but you see, if we want to shift the hearts and minds of people, and we want people to adopt a philosophy, because at the end of the day, if we want a radical change of governments and we want politicians there that kind of will move us in the right direction, then we need the right sort of people as politicians, and we need the right sort of people to vote them in. So fundamentally, we need people who are vegan to be the politicians, and you want people, we kind of need vegans to vote them in, don't we? So therefore, kind of that means that we want people to philosophically kind of believe in animal liberation, and that's what veganism is about. It's a philosophy of animal liberation. So if we don't guide people towards accepting that philosophy as individuals, because you see, I don't think there's a system that's separate from individuals, because we all make up the system. It's our voting choice, our behaviour, everything like that makes up the system. So, in my view, you have to, in order to get system change, you have to have individual change. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. We've got this government because people voted them in, and individual people went down the polling station, or whatever, put a cross next to the politician they were elected. And so I can kind of, I can understand all this, the thing about wanting system change. Yeah, we all want system change. It's just how that system change comes about. And like what I'd like to see is, as well as everything else, you encourage people to become vegan and even have something on your website about how they can do that, not just in terms of the diet, but in terms of the actual philosophy.
Maybe I can come in on that as well. I guess in my mind, we are encouraging people to go vegan without using the word vegan. And what we're doing, in my mind, is essentially connecting people to their values. And I believe it's stepping stones. So a lot of the interviews and a lot of the press that we're speaking to are, GB News and far right wing media outlets. And so when speaking to them, I think it's a huge step for them to consider the word vegan, even because already that's woke in their box. They've already put that in a box of woke. And so what we want to do is to connect those people with love and safety and protection and care, the values that they align themselves with, that most good people align themselves with, and make that stepping stone towards veganism. But I believe that saying vegan outright is quite alienating, certainly in the first few sentences. And it comes up often in interviews, and we don't shy away from saying that we would like everyone to go vegan. We've said that many times over and over in interviews.
But it could be included in it could be included
we
in.
don't lead with
it, yeah, but it could be included because
we believe
when
it's
you say, when you're talking about the change that you want, why not something like people as individuals can help with this by becoming vegan? And if you want information about that, here's a link that you can go to. How would that do any harm? Because kind of hoping that somehow people will almost guess that you want them to become vegan. I think you kind of have to sort of make it a bit clearer to that, and that can be done in a very gentle way. Otherwise, I think a lot of people aren't. People are going to read that article about the lambs, and they're going to think that was brilliant. It's well done to those people, those lovely lambs. They've saved them. But then those people haven't taken anything from that about what they personally can do as individuals. And what they can do as individuals is important in terms of system change, because in order to get system change, see, I kind of see it the other way. You're like talking about we change at the top, and then then everything else changes. But how do you get the change at the top in the first place? Unless you change people as individuals, you're not going to get the change at the top. How is that ever going to happen?
Well, let me bring this in, because Ronnie, you were saying that because here in the third paragraph, you've got the systemic, cultural, and personal transformations, and our kind of position was that the order of them is the wrong way around in a way, because it's difficult to know, and this is why I was interested in research. It's difficult to know where you get the systemic change from if you haven't already had cultural change, and you get the cultural change from personal transformations, or is it all that's exactly why I was interested in what research you were using to drive this theory of change, which was this way around, if that makes sense. And I'm going to have to, unfortunately, when I move my cursor off the thing, it turns back to that. But yeah, so that's why I was asking about the research, in the sense that if we all want to revolutionize the system, but what is the process by? I mean, are you talking about writing to MPs? Are you talking about? I know that you're very keen on ideas like engaging with the farming and the fishing communities, in dialogue. And so when you talk about creating this dialogue, this conversation, which I really like that idea, what's going to be the product of that? Do you see in terms of your strategy and what the research tells you?
Yeah. So what like what we believe and what we're working on is that is values-based messaging at its heart. So when you lead with values, and this has been the research that backs this up has been done by people like Anat Schenker-Osorio and ASO Communications, by Ian Haney-Lopez and the race class narrative in America. And then it's underpinned as well by a lot of the research done by Center for Story-Based Strategy, Frameworks Institute, Narrative Initiative, and others who have been looking at the ways in which narrative messaging lands and how you shift people, as Orla said, along stepping stones. And it might be just one step along that path to a different an action, different behavior. So when we lead with values, so when our messaging leads with, we're all, for example, we're all animal lovers, or we all want to see these lambs be, live out their lives. We all want to be compassionate people. We all believe that we're sort of like compassionate people. What we're doing is aligning the audience that we're speaking to with the values that we're enacting in our action, through the actions, through the campaigns, and having them recognize that they share those values and we share those values together.
I understand that. You're tapping into the values of individuals, not the system, though, right?
No, but but what? Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a it's a bit of a misunderstanding, I think, not on your behalf. It's a bit of a misnomer, perhaps, on the way that that's read in that order: systemic, culture, and personal transformations. They're not sort of linear, systemic first and then personal transformations. What we're doing is trying to change all of these things through our work at once. So we are aiming for personal transformation of those who take part in actions. We're aiming for the personal transformation of the people who see our messaging and therefore want to believe that we have the shared values and then want to act differently. And that's where dialogue comes in as well. That's how that transforms as well. We're looking at personal transformation and cultural transformation that is tied with the systemic transformation we want. So we're not asking for a government top-down change to the system. We're asking for our theory of change is 20 to 25% of the general public actively support our messaging, actively to support our objective, and then through that active support transforms the social norm around whether we treat animals as property or not.
Yeah, well, I don't want to speak for Ronnie because he can speak for himself, but I think you're stating very clearly what needs to be done, but in relation to the individuals, you're not telling them what they can do. It's almost as though they would kind of connect the dots themselves. And I know that for many years until very, very recently in this century, there's been a lot of influential people in the animal advocacy movement who've suggested that veganism is a bit of a scare word, right? And so it's an off-putting word. It's best to avoid it. So a lot of the animal groups would talk about go veggie and all that kind of stuff. So it's only been recently in this part of the 21st century that we've really made veganism the center of our claims making, and the reluctance was because it was thought to be a bit of a scare word. But all of you kind of suggested that you think that could be the case.
I think the word veganism is incredibly useful internally. For example, vegans relating to each other. I think it's incredibly useful. I am slightly skeptical of, as I said earlier, bringing people from one stepping stone to the next stepping stone, and whether or not labels in general are helpful in that process. And an example of this, I think, is that a lot of people, I would say a large percentage of the general public, wouldn't consider themselves feminists, looking at the feminist movement. Yet most people want women to have equal rights. And I believe that's a reluctance to take on a label, as labels have a lot of connotations. And so I think that when the world goes vegan, when everyone is vegan, we won't need a name to describe it, because it will be the norm. And the norm is often unlabeled. And so I think it's really beneficial when communicating internally. But I do think that down the road, when we have this beautiful vegan world, that we will only label the oppressor. For example, we have a racist, but the word anti-racist is not really used that often because most people are considered it. It's the norm. Does that kind of make sense?
It's a kind of carnage argument from the Carnage film, isn't it? But yeah, so yeah, I get that. And so by talking about we need to bring about a plant-based food system, you're expecting people to then think individually, oh, therefore I need to go plant-based without you kind of, as it were, telling them what to do.
Well, just to say one thing on that, I guess it is something that we have been speaking about a lot internally. We haven't, I guess, been as much a part of the vegan education journey as other groups have. And a big part of that was we felt that there are a lot of groups who are like filling that niche. And so we've been focusing on the direct action and the system change messaging more, but perhaps it is something that we will move into, kind of taking people on that journey a bit more and going into that.
Can I add something there just quickly? Yeah, I mean, what we are doing is we're asking people to. So, for example, after the Grand National, you know, we were asking people when we set the agenda for that weekend about in the news. We were asking people to support us in bringing an incredibly cruel old traditional habit in the UK to an end. And actually, the YouGov poll came out that weekend with 52% thinking the Grand National was cruel, and an awful lot of media attention saying, yeah, we need to really think about this. And even the British Veterinary Society Association came out and said, we need to relook at this. So what we were doing there in that action was asking people to support us in bringing a cruel tradition to an end. So we were asking, so what we're doing is asking people to support a position. And the same with the dairy farm occupation and the same with the lamb rescue. What we're doing there is asking people to help us support a position that as a nation, we need this big conversation about how we exploit animals. And we obviously land that with a bit more gentle language for the right wing, for those who need, you know, many more steps along that path. And we're asking them to support us in that conversation. And this is the first stage of what I see as maybe a 5 or 10 year campaign to move apologies, a 25% chunk of the population towards a position where they're actively supporting an animal-free food system.
And in relation to the Grand National and the one, we're going to lose Alex soon. He's going to die on screen. That'll be our first time. It's us who was supposed to make the joke about being still alive, Alex. I don't know what you're doing here.
It's us that's in danger of croaking. Should be, shouldn't it?
So I suppose so that's what I'm trying to get my head around. And I said to Ronnie that I think the idea is that they are talking about veganism without using the word. And so to bring about a plant-based food system will then, for the individual, think, oh, well, I know what to do. So in relation to the racing, presumably that's based on boycotting it, boycotting the betting and boycotting the actual going to it in order to bring that down. Because obviously the racing industry, they're going to respond to anything vaguely radical with welfare. So they've already talked about reducing the field and making the fences easy, which they've done already and stuff. And so you're really aiming that conversation at the consumer of horse racing and the people that go and the people that support it through betting, right?
Yes, in a way, and that's why we targeted the Grand National, because it is the biggest race in the world. It was targeting 600 million viewers on screen. And as I said, we were front page on 8 newspapers that weekend, 30 or 40 interviews across the TV and radio. And what we were doing every time was asking people to have a conversation about the way that we exploit animals. And what that does is if you lead, well, our belief is if we stood up and went onto all of those programs and said, we need the world to go vegan, we need you all to recognize we need to stop exploiting animals, we need to do this in horse racing and in the food system, and we did connect those two together in every interview and every time that we could. But if you lead with that, then it turns 95% of people off. They don't want to hear about it because it's a challenge to their behavior, a challenge to their identity. And what we were doing is raising the attention of, this is the conversation that we need to have. And as I said, this is the first step in a long campaign that we believe is necessary for us to do, while other organisations.
I'm getting this. But the last point from me, and I'll hand it over to Ronnie, because when you're doing Reese Mogg, you talked about you yourself being vegan, but that's different for you than, well, I'm vegan, but that's different from saying live vegan to other people, right? So I'm getting the strategy on that.
Yeah. I think the thing is, I think it's not a question of kind of leading with it, but having it somewhere in there, even at the end. I mean, it's like with the horse racing. Like, what ordinary people, the most practical thing that an ordinary person can do to help bring horse racing to an end is not to go to it and not to bet on it, because horse racing receives a lot of money from bets, even if people never go to the course. So that's the practical way an ordinary person can help in their own way and in their own life bring an end to horse racing. And so for me, that would be something that would be maybe at the end of the messaging. And the same with about going vegan, that if people want to not be involved in this personally, if people kind of want to take a personal stand against what's being done to these other animals, then the way to do that is to go vegan, because it's a philosophy of opposition to all these things. That's what veganism is. So that's the philosophy. We want those 25% of the population that's needed to turn things around to kind of really kind of adhere to that philosophy. That's kind of what we're obviously hoping. And so to kind of not mention what people can do in their own lives like that, I think it's kind of missing a chance to mention it when it doesn't have to affect anything else you say. It could be just something that, just a message to people that you have in the statement that you make.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to come into this, Orla, but I disagree, Ronnie. I think if you, like I said, Roger said there, you get in the strategy. Like, if we get asked if we're vegan, we don't lie about it. So we bring it up, we talk about it, and say, absolutely, we want to have an animal-free food system. We want animals to not be exploited. But I think if what we're trying to do is move people along a journey. And so we're following things sort of like, the cognitive linguistic theory of Mark Johnson and George Lakoff. And we're following like the narrative enactment theory of a guy called Hans Hansen, who've done a lot of work in this area about sort of the movement. We all run on scripts. And those scripts, those heuristics on our head, are the things that we go by in life. And as you said, veganism is a philosophy, and so is carnism. So are all of these really deeply buried social belonging ideologies that tell people that eating meat is natural and normal and necessary. And so we're trying to unpick that, but we're unpicking it in ways we believe are the most effective to be, first of all, aligning people with understanding the values that, when you ask most people, they say, oh, of course I love animals. Yeah, and what they mean is obviously they love their cat or their dog, or they love seeing lambs in the field. And what they don't want to be seen as is people who are harming animals. They don't want to be seen as killers. They don't want to be seen as sort of, these horrible people who exploit and harm animals. And what we're doing, first of all, is creating the scenarios in which we can tap into their existing cognitive models of care, responsibility, fairness, love, compassion, and identifying that and aligning that with a positive view of themselves, which is, oh yeah, I am an animal lover. I really do care about these horses. I'm not going to bet on them again. I do care about those sheep. I do want to actually start having this conversation. So in a way, we're both harder with the direct action, but also more gentle in taking people along that journey. But because we're speaking to a lot of people who are very, very far away from the step to be going vegan.
But I think I think you're kind of expecting people to kind of work out for themselves what they need to do. And I'm not sure that everyone will do that. And my concern is that people will go away from that thinking, oh yeah, I agree with those folks. That's great. And then not do anything because they've not been given any guidance as to what they can do. And it's the same.
I would think on that one, Ronnie, it's to do with agency. And it seems that the strategy here is for allowing the audience to connect the dots. And like Andy says here, Me saying I'm vegan means very little in comparison to say the solution is the problem for everybody going vegan. So, but going back to your appearance on Rees-Mogg, then Alex, is you're saying you're vegan. That brings up the issue, puts it into people's head, and then they as the agent then go, well, that's a solution for me too, right? And so it's kind of allowing the audience more agency.
Yeah, and very often what we're trying to do, I mean, this gives, if we give away a little bit of the, the internal workings of Animal Rising, we have, it's very well structured. I'm not saying it's the best, we're the best organization in the world, but I'm really impressed by the organization within Animal Rising. In that, as spokespeople, for example, we meet 3 times a week and practice. And in that practice, we are talking about the strategies to elicit the questions that we want, that we can then put out there. And so that question of like bringing people to ask us if we're vegan is very much better than us putting it in there as the solution, because actually people don't like hearing it. But when they hear it as a model, and that you're actually not trying to put that forward, and what you're trying to do is elicit a conversation in people, that's actually more effective. I believe that is very effective. Because what we're trying to bring a huge proportion of this percentage of the population on a journey towards actively supporting us. And so in the theories that we're using, so back to this, like we've looked a lot at like Erica Chenoweth and Stephen's work on how, why civil resistance works. We've looked at a lot of Damon Santola's work on the social change of social norms. And in Erica Chenoweth's book, it's 3.5% of the population need to be active, but you need another 20% of the population actively supporting those who are active and saying, yes, they're right, even if they're not taking action themselves. So that 25% models against also the Damon Santola figures, that if you want social norms to switch, you need about 25% of the population supporting that social norm. So 25% of the UK population is what, about 15 million people, or at least 12 million adults. And how many vegans have we got? Maybe less than 1 million at the moment. So what we absolutely need to tap into the audiences of flexitarians and vegetarians and people who love animals and people who, keep their micro sanctuaries, but maybe a bit of cheese. We need those people to be actively supporting the 3.5% of us who are out on the streets doing stuff. Otherwise, we're not going to get the social change we want. So that is our theory of change. And we really believe that the messaging that we're using in terms of values-led, the values identify then the shared problem, and then the solution to that shared problem is a less threatening one, such as an animal-free food system that we need to transition and help farmers transition in. We believe that's the most effective messaging for getting the social change that we need. And again, it's not going to happen in the next 3 weeks. It might happen in the next 10 years. That's what we're aiming for.
4 weeks. 4 weeks.
4 weeks, maybe 6 weeks. Yeah, at least time enough for me to get rid of this bloody cold.
Well, there's I see a little fault line in that I'll come back to. But I mean, in terms of what Orla said about moving things on, I was wondering about that in relation to the animal lover thing. Because I mean, personally, I hate that construction. Obviously, other animals don't need us to love them; they need us to respect them, and all the rest of it. So we as vegans know that. And so, is the idea that you will kind of shift that narrative a little bit to almost like start to question because you started off, we are a nation of animal lovers, and it's almost like, are you going to get to the stage where it's said that we're a nation, we're supposed to be, is that the idea?
So yeah, this is what we do, I guess, in most of our interviews and in most of our social media posts, even raising questions. So, if we're a nation of animal lovers, or as a nation of animal lovers, how can we justify this treatment? And as Alex said, bringing it back to values, a line I use all the time in interviews is, we're a nation of animal lovers, but our actions are not at all in line with those values that we're claiming to have. And I guess making people really aware of that hypocrisy.
I get that. I was just wondering whether it's going to end up being well, it's said that we're a nation of animals, but there's not much evidence of it. That type of thing, because that would be a progression to move people who think one way to think critically about their own position.
But it's actually not true that we're a nation of animal lovers. How can we be a nation of animal lovers? Most people are throwing the parts of animals down their throats every day. We aren't a nation of animal lovers. It may be claimed that we are. People may think that we are, but to actually say we're a nation of animal lovers isn't true. So you're kind of basing it on something that actually isn't true, because people thinking they're animal lovers doesn't mean they actually are, and claiming to be a nation of animal lovers doesn't mean that the UK is a nation of animal lovers, because the UK clearly isn't a nation of animal lovers.
Yeah, my response to that is that things don't need to be true to be incredibly powerful. And I think at the moment in the UK, we live within this myth of us being a nation of animal lovers. And the fact that it might not be true in relation to, obviously, the exploitation of animals, particularly through food and farming, it's still an incredibly powerful myth. I mean, Mark Webster, the DEFRA minister, stood up, and when he gave his statement to the House this week, where he introduced, the fact that they were dropping the kept animals bill, he started that statement with, "We're a nation of animal lovers." So it's an incredibly powerful myth that many people do believe and want to believe. And so what we're doing is, I believe what we're doing is deploying it quite strategically and judiciously. So when we're talking to all of those people who were watching the Grand National and wondering why on earth we were doing what we were doing, actually tapping into their mythical belief in that was really useful for exposing their hypocritical behaviour. And then there will be times where we do take Roger's strategy exactly, and as Orla's already said, like, we call ourselves a nation of animal lovers, but we're not aligned with those actions. So, because actually, if we got to a point where we were living the truth of that myth, what a great world it would be, because we would be a vegan country, we would be a vegan planet. So what we're trying to do is strategically use that myth, which is an incredibly powerful myth in the UK, to both align those people who consider themselves animal.
It's a downright lie rather than a myth, really, isn't it?
Yeah,
myth in the strategic sense, myth in the sense that it's something that people believe.
But wouldn't the solution be to say just a different form of words in a nation that, in what claims to be a nation of animal lovers? Why is this happening? Now that would be true, because yes, it can be said to be true that it's claimed that the UK is a nation of animal lovers. So that isn't an untruth. So that would, I think, would be equally as strong, but with avoiding something that isn't true, because of course a lot of people within the sort of vegan / animal rights movements kind of wonder why you say that. They're thinking, what are you talking about? This isn't a nation of animal lovers. What's all that about? People find it very strange.
Yeah, to be honest, I mean, our audience isn't the vegan community. Our audience, when we're putting out these press releases into the mainstream media and we're going on GB News, our audience generally isn't like that. The vegan community. What we're trying to do is shift the 25%, and to do that, you need to tap into their cognitive models and give them something that's not too alien, so that they can rearrange it in their own heads, as Roger said, join the dots.
But you need the support of the vegan community. See, when you wanted people to take part in the blockade of the dairy distribution centres, you put out something on social media, calling all vegans. You wanted vegans to come along and to take part in that, because really it was only going to be vegans that would take part in that, really. And so you're encouraging vegans. You want vegans to take part in those things. But then you're kind of saying to them, don't wear a vegan t-shirt and don't wear a vegan badge. And, we want vegans, but we don't want you to be vegans or to express yourself as vegans. And that's going to put people off. And you need, if you're going to carry out these actions, you need the activists. and you're only going to get the activists from the vegan community. So if you alienate people by that kind of thing, then you're not going to get the people. I mean, I've spoken to grassroots animal rising people, and most of them are very concerned about that. These people are vegans. These are people that, when they're not doing animal rising activity, they're going to be involved with Cuba Truth. That, you know, they're going to involve groups like Viva, who openly promote veganism, and those people are openly promoting veganism, you know, in their other activities. And then all of a sudden they're asked to not mention veganism. We don't tell people about veganism. And I think a lot of people find that very difficult and very strange. And it's the kind of same thing to do with the sort of plant-based future. That those people you're recruiting, their primary concern is about what is happening to the individual animals that are oppressed and persecuted by the farming industry. You know, what is happening to the cows, what's happened to the, you know, to the lambs, to the chickens, and all of that. That's their primary concern. Okay, like, you know, I'm sure they're all concerned about the climate as well, but like their primary concern is about what's happening to those animals. Now, I think that things have changed. You're kind of starting to talk more about what happens to the you know, to the animals that are directly exploited. I mean, certainly in the in the press release regarding the rescue of the lambs, you know, there was a very good statement about opposition to, you know, the exploitation and use of those animals, and that's really good. But it's kind of like, if that doesn't come first, it's rather like saying, let's say the slave trade, you know, the shipping of the slaves at the time of the slave trade caused some kind of environmental damage. It's like having a campaign against the slave trade and mention it. So the slave trade, we need to stop the slave trade because it damages the environment. And oh, and by the way, it's not very nice for the slaves either. Whereas that's the wrong way round. You know, the primary thing is the infringement of the lives of those living beings, the individual living beings. That's the first thing. And the thing is, that is kind of what most vegans feel. That's what comes first in their hearts. And so to kind of not do that, it's going to put people off, and people aren't going to want to be involved because they don't feel you're representing what they really feel.
I just want to clarify, Ronnie, I'm not sure where you've heard that we ask people to not talk about veganism at all, because I don't think that's really a part of our...
You're not what those people really believe. Like, those people are vegans and they want, you know, they want veganism, but you're wanting them to come along. They're vegans, saying, cool, no, we want all vegans to come. But like, then when they do take part, then they can't talk about veganism.
Well, they're not asked to not talk about veganism. I guess I don't really know. We run internal surveys for people who take actions, and it's not come back in the feedback. The messaging is really clearly explained to everyone who does take action, and the responses have been really positive so far in the anonymous surveys. So I'm not sure that this is as big a concern for people.
See, people I know, the reason they take part is because they want to take part in an action, you know, because they, you know, they feel they're concerned about the animals. You know, the reason why people want to take part in the dairy blockade is because, you know, they're concerned primarily about the plight of the cows and the calves, and they want to do something like to kind of, you know, against the dairy industry, because the dairy industry, they're the oppressors of those animals. So those people say, yeah, you know, I want to block a dairy depot because of what those people are doing to the animals. That's why I want to do it. That's the motivation for why they want to do it. That's where that came from. That's you know, that's the motivation of, like, probably most of the activists I've spoken to. Their primary motivation wasn't the climate crisis. Yeah, the climate crisis is important, but that wasn't the reason those people went on that, right? And so you're getting people involved, but they're not really in messaging expressing the primary motivation of the grassroots people that you're getting involved.
Shall I say something there, Orla? Yeah. I mean, so when I was there on the 30th of June 2019 when we had the first ever meeting of Animal Rebellion, you know, to decide whether we were going to build this organization, and every single person was there for the animals. But we also made a strategic decision that we can really leverage the climate crisis here, because the climate crisis is also really significant to us in our hearts. But everyone was there because they were vegan and desperately keen to to end the exploitation of animals and end the suffering for animals. And that's still I think that is still the case for most people now. Animals are central in our heart. And and that part of the rebranding from Animal Rebellion to Animal Rising was to re-emphasize that we are an animal movement rising for animals. The fact that if the systemic change that can come through having an animal-free food system, if it does come from the top down, or if it comes from the side in terms of animal farmers realizing the industry is really crippled and needs to change and transition, then them actually all transitioning into a plant-based food system, an animal-free food system. Wherever that change comes from, we're absolutely motivated for the animals. But again, the theory of change is that when we're trying to talk to 25% of the population who aren't vegan and who don't even really like vegans, we explain very clearly to any activist who's taking part with us that animals are at the absolute heart of what we do, and they're at the heart of my action, and I know Ola's action, as I know they are for both of you. But the messaging is it's speaking to a different audience. And
but when anyone's doing vegan outreach, they're speaking to the same audience as you.
But the theory of change is different. What we're doing, we're not doing one-to-one conversations. We're essentially aiming for the mass media. And that's a very, very different method of conversation to a much larger audience, where we can't have those one-to-one conversations with people doing vegan education or outreach.
But it's a one-to-one conversation with, you see, if I'm say delivering leaflets promoting veganism, then I'm having a one-to-one conversation through that leaflets with the people in that particular house where I've delivered the leaflets. And that is the same as a newspaper article, where they say that it's the same process. They'll read the leaflet, they read the newspaper article, and so there's a message on the leaflets, a message on the newspaper article, and the message on the leaflet is about the importance of going vegan and the reasons for that. And so it's no different. That's no different to an article in a newspaper, a letter in a newspaper. That's exactly the same, and that's a one-to-one messaging.
Yeah. And all of the incredible work that all of the activists have done over the last 50, 60 years have only reached a level of like less than a million vegans in the UK.
But you see,
I don't think there's any. I don't think anyone in this room, and I don't think anyone watching, has yet figured out the solution. And what we're doing is, we've researched as well as we can. Yeah. The best, what we believe is the most effective theory of change with the most effective messaging strategies, and we're trying to do that.
You see, Alex, I don't think it is something that's kind of tried and failed. I think it kind of really, that vegan outreach kind of for the number of vegans we've got and the number of people who call themselves vegan has actually really come from a comparatively tiny amount of outreach, to be honest. And so I think the way that we create, in my view, it's not kind of failed as a method. The reason that we've not got more vegans is because we don't have enough vegans doing outreach. And so I think the key is to how do we get more vegans doing outreach? And I think Animal Rising could play a really important part in that, as like the kind of spearhead of that. In other words, that you're doing these actions that attract a lot of attention, that kind of get people interested, and then you obviously want people to take part in the direct action. But there are a hell of a lot of people who can't take part in the direct action. So what you could be saying to those people is, okay, if you can't join us, then you can get involved in outreach, you can get involved in your local vegan group, you can take part in the educational process to educate more people to vegan, because it's not something that's been tried and failed. It's something that just hasn't really been tried. We just, for the number of vegans we've actually got, the amount of outreach actually has been really comparatively little and compared with what it could be.
Yeah, no, I mean, I accept that. A fair point, and certainly I did. I do forgive me if it sounded as if I was calling it a failure. I certainly wasn't doing that.
No,
I think none of us have yet collectively solved this problem that we're trying to solve. And I think for example, in Animal Rising, for example, we do have our plant-based universities campaigns. We do have a plant-based councils campaign. We have the farmer dialogue. And we have spoken, I'm sure, haven't we all, about sort of like how we play a role in people's vegan journeys. And I think again, like that's part of our learning and part of our evolution, certainly. And certainly conversations like this really help. Being challenged on what we're doing and really having to think much harder about the ways in which we can sort of work across the whole vegan movement, the animal liberation movement is really important.
That's right. I mean, I think it's really important that people, reiterating what I've just said, I think it's really important that people realize that the potential of vegan outreach has nowhere near been reached. People that are saying that, we've already had loads of vegan outreach and stuff and it's not worked, that is actually not the case. And I'm sure Roger would agree with me on that. It's something that's fairly recent in the history of the movement. It's something that isn't widespread in most towns and cities throughout the country. There's no outreach takes place at all. It tends to happen in the center of big cities. We've nowhere reached the potential for outreach that we could have. And yet we've already, despite all that, we've still got this, there's still been this big increase in veganism, nowhere near as much as we'd like, but there's still, despite the very small amount of outreach that's happened, we've had really a big increase in veganism. So I think if we could encourage far more vegans to get involved in outreach everywhere where we could go. And I kind of think Animal Rising could play a part in that by being the kind of, I don't want to use words that you kind of probably don't like and aren't in accordance with you could be like the shock troops of vegan outreach. In other words, like you're kind of creating the publicity and the fuss and getting people interested, and people are going to think, well, if those people can go into that place and they can rescue lambs, if they can go and do that occupation, and one really brilliant thing I think you do is where people give themselves up to the police and say, here I am, I've done that. I think that's incredibly powerful.
You never did that, right?
Yeah, we never did it. We ran away because, of course, the seriousness of our so-called criminality was much greater. And so, but I think this potentially is, the ALF achieved a lot of stuff, but in a way, like I think I look at the ALF as a kind of Neanderthals of the direct action movement in that kind of we died out and we were never really going to succeed in getting anywhere because our message wasn't aimed at the public. We didn't try to change awareness. We weren't an awareness raising organization, and that was our downfall. And so eventually it was crushed by the state, and that's pretty much the end of it. It's still limping along. Whereas the type of direct action that Animal Rising does, because it's people aren't trying to get away, and it's the criminality is like much, so-called criminality is much lower level than we ever did. It's kind of much more sustainable, and it could kind of go all the way in terms of achieving animal liberation as the encouragement to others, this huge outreach effort that we could all get involved in. All these vegans that currently kind of don't do anything in terms of outreach. If there was an inspiration from an organization like yourselves where people are prepared to put themselves on the line, then I'm sure that would encourage people. If they can do it, I can do my own little bit, and you could encourage that as well. And so we could have this really meaningful outreach effort. And so we could, I think we could actually encourage lots and lots more people to go vegan than is currently the case.
And I think, come back to something Orla said earlier, like I think we, like, and you just said there, Ronnie, I think, we are an awareness raising organization. By gaining the front pages and the TV and radio coverage, and I think what we there's certainly conversations to have, aren't there, between Animal Rising and other movements that could immediately mobilize people into. You've seen them on the streets, you've seen them rescue the lambs, you've seen them blockade, stop the Grand National. Now let's get out on the streets and turn everyone vegan through the vegan outreach. So there's partnerships there. I think across, because again, Animal Rising, we want more. We're drawing in many more people to take action, but we still want a lot more people to take action. And it's not just like that's the issue for us, isn't it? There's lots of vegans, but there's not enough people actually taking action.
Do you have any kind of figures on who the activists are? Because I'm kind of assuming, and correct me if I'm wrong, that probably the vast majority of your activists are probably vegans.
Yes, the vast majority. Yeah, I think almost all.
And so that built into what we were talking about. Ronnie and I were talking about this idea that the communication between Animal Rising and the vegan base of the activism. We're thinking from the kind of feedback that we've had that there's a possibility of alienating the vegan core to it. Now, this is actually quite an interesting thing. It's a little bit like when people talk about movement unity. What that basically means is the welfarist has to right is to do welfare. But in terms of the vegan thing, if you think in terms of a community like the reducitarians, the vegetarians, and the vegans, we know that it's the vegans who are the activists. And so in terms, and your thing is based on activism. And so that means that not losing the vegans is incredibly important to you. And so the feedback that we were getting, which was articulated by Ronnie, was a worry for us, because we're thinking, well, maybe what it just needs is for Animal Rising to explain to the activists on the ground the rationale of what was going on, would get them to understand. For example, the example that I knew, which was separate from what Ronnie said, was that a lot of the old school vegans, they were done things like the greyhound racing campaigns, that they'll have been outside the Grand National before, that they'll have done stuff, and they've got a great little slogan, which is "You bet they die," which is that kind of play on words. And I was told that they were asked by Animal Rising not to chant that at the Grand National, and of course from their point of view, that was kind of their thing. That's what you do at. So I think it needs for them to understand where a more subtle approach, perhaps, or something. But so lines of communication, in other words, seem to. I'm not saying broken or anything, and I don't know that much about it. But in terms of what I've heard, it's just that given that they are your activists, essentially, it's a question of keeping them, informed, I guess. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess we have been trying to do like messaging briefings to anyone who's coming to action. We offer them really openly, but perhaps we need to communicate that better with other groups as well, who are going representing themselves and not kind of part of Animal Rising. So yeah, I think that's a good point about how to communicate as best as possible.
We've gone over the hour, but I wanted to talk a little bit about the media. But before that, there's a couple of things. Are you worried about this issue? This is going back to the animal lover thing, about rather than correcting the myth, it's kind of bolstering or perpetuating it. Do you think there's a danger of using that language, as it were, uncritically, could be a problem?
I don't know. Maybe I think I have a slightly different perspective on this than Alex, and maybe perhaps you guys as well. I think you guys think it's a lie to say that we are a nation of animal lovers, and I don't agree with that. I don't think it's a lie. I think most people consider themselves as animal lovers, and I think that our actions are not at all in line with our values. I think people, once awakened to their actions, will correct their actions to be in line with the values. I don't know if that really makes sense.
Well, I don't think it makes sense to what Alex was saying, depending on the species, because people are a nation of animal lovers in relation to cats and dogs, and that part of it is true, by and large. Although there's still quite a lot of oppression of cats and dogs, not least in vivisection laboratories. But when you switch species, actually, that's when it all kind of falls apart.
Well, I think that's not really been my experience, in that, for example, driving down the car on holidays and in a car full of people, they look out the window and they see cows in a field and they think, wow, look at the cows, it's fantastic. And they feel a connection towards the animal. Same with foxes and badgers. They don't realize the harm that these industries are inflicting, or the whole animal agricultural process. But I certainly don't think that most people hate animals. I think that they love them and would love them more if they realized what was happening. I think most people love nature as well. I think they, can connect with birds in the sky, and they can connect in small ways. And we need to bridge the gap.
If you were running, say, an anti-racist campaign, you wouldn't say, we are a nation of people that love people of color. I mean, that wouldn't be, the word love wouldn't be kind of used in that context, because what we want is, we want respect and we want justice, don't we? And we want liberation. I don't know where does love come into it? It isn't
Absolutely.
about love,
and I think you're dead right, Ronnie, in that further down the road we need to move towards that kind of messaging. But I think we're so far away from, for example, the anti-racist movement. I think people need to
be just a springboard at the moment, Ronnie. It's a springboard, a starting place, a springboard.
Yes, I see that. But you see, like, if you start off saying something that kind of isn't true, then you have to sort of undo all that before you can move any further. And it kind of blatantly isn't true that just because somebody thinks there's something doesn't mean that they actually are the thing that they think they are. And so some people thinking they're animal lovers doesn't mean they are animal lovers, like, objectively. And so I can't see how it helps to kind of reinforce their false view of themselves in that way.
I mean, that's why I call it a myth, because in the strategic narrative sense of it, it's something people believe about themselves, even if it isn't consistently true across all species. But if what you're doing, like as I said, if you go back to like the cognitive linguistic theory of how you shift the scripts that we go by, if animal lovers is a script that we go by, and that's why Mark Spencer, the DEFRA minister, started his statement in the House of Commons with that phrasing, "We're a nation of animal lovers," just on Monday or Tuesday. What you're doing is you're taking one of those three strategies. You're exposing it for the misalignment of values, which is what Orla was talking about earlier. You're identifying it. You're what's the word? Revealing it as a myth, and then you are showing that it could and should be true, and actually that people do have values for. They think they're animal lovers because they love their cat, but really they should be animal lovers by loving all animals. And I know what you're saying there about sort of love, like it shouldn't be down to love, and that's it shouldn't be. You shouldn't need to respect and not exploit another being, another person. You shouldn't need to love them to not have to do that. But what we're doing is tapping into a very prevalent myth in the UK that we are a nation of animal lovers, and using that strategically in one of those three ways as the entry point into aligning values with people, so that you shift them to be open to your solution to the problem.
Perhaps exposing how shallow that myth is.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and there will be the right time and right occasions for doing that. Absolutely.
So let me move on then to, because we've only got a few minutes left. If we move on to my media question, but this one came up a long time ago. Pro-Veg and SIVA, are you associated with those or in communication with it, says here?
No, I mean, I personally know pro-veg people, but not in communication with them. I'm not sure if Animal Rising are. I'd imagine we are through our relationships team. Yeah.
Okay. I think for some people that might kind of explain some of the claims making, perhaps. The media thing now. We all remember that kind of hilarious thing that happened on the run-up, I think, to the Grand National, where this presenter had one of your spokespersons and also a horse consultant, and he didn't know that the horse consultant. You remember that, right? And so,
yeah.
But the interesting media part of it is the fact that your spokesperson, and forgive me, I can't remember the name, a guy, he said, it's kind of like there's no reason for any animal use, whether it's for entertainment or for food, right? And it switched back to the presenter, who then went to the horse consultant and said, well, this guy's saying that what you're doing is cruel. And I was thinking, well, this is quite interesting, because that's not the claims making that was coming out whatsoever. Now, Ronnie and I have been press officers, and we know that it's very difficult for journalists sometimes not just to simply go back to what they've always written and just repeat it. And so consequently, they will often think that when you're talking animal rights, you're really talking animal welfare. When you're talking rights violations, you're really talking animal cruelty and this kind of stuff. So I'm just wondering about, have you kind of, as an organization, taken steps to try to build on, relationships with journalists? In my day, you could contact individual journalists who are there all the time. I imagine it's a bit more amorphous now. But is it something that you're working on? That's the question, really. After 5 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we have a really good working relationship with, I'd say, about 10 journalists, and then we have a contact with hundreds more. Our press team is actually incredible, really hardworking, and it's about, I think that's really, we spoke a bit with Direct Action Everywhere, and we spoke. I went to kind of a conference about messaging with journalists and what they're really finding in America, and I think it's going to follow a similar pattern here in the UK, is because the press is so polarized at the moment, that having these built up connections with journalists is really how you get that high quality press. Initially after an action, you get that shock media with crazy headlines, but actually in the runoff after an action, it's a few days later where you might get a really good article with a journalist who's put the time and effort into, helping to really shift the narrative on a deeper level. And that's really what we are developing for the first time. We finally have the capacity in the last 4 months or so to really start building those relationships that could change the bigger picture.
Yeah, it's I thought that would be it, because it must be because the mass media is a bit of a monster. We know from social movement theory that it's the mass part of mass media which is seductive for social movements. Less so now, of course, because of the internet. But still, even then, the idea of getting on, primetime TV and into international press, that kind of stuff, it's very kind of seductive. It's just that they can kind of bite your head off, chew it up and spit it back out again. It's a bit of a monster to deal with. I know that, so that's why I wanted to ask that question. So we're coming up to about 1 hour and 15. So does anybody want to make any, as it were, closing statements or last thoughts or anything like that before we thank all our wonderful people and say goodbye?
Yeah, I can just say, just rounding up on that question about sort of the idea or frame of love is that, and I've just seen some of the messages come up on the screen, so I did want to say, absolutely, people say they love their cars and they'll, and it's not the same love, where you love a companion. And what we're trying to do there is absolutely highlight the fact that people aren't, so people don't understand, or people aren't aligned with the values that they say they're aligning with. So my mum, I've said this into the media, like my mum was she loved horses. She worked in a betting shop. She used to put bets on all the time. She had her hen do at Epsom Derby. When she got remarried, all of the tables at her wedding were named after her favorite horses. She absolutely loved horses, but she didn't know that betting on them was doing them harm. So you can have that love for another species or another set of beings without understanding the full picture, which is why you come back to, I grew up, as a meat eater. I'm sure many of us did, before realizing the harm that's done to them. So in a way, what we're trying to do is, identify that journey is very common and get people on the steps of that journey. But you only do that by activating sort of their values of what's important to them. That's the best and easiest and clearest way to win a campaign, is to get people to realize what's valuable to them and actually show them the action that aligns with that value. And that's what we're trying to do. But I really appreciate this conversation. It's been really enjoyable, and it's been a good challenge, and it's been a lot for us to think about. So thank you.
I'd really like to say one last thing as well, a bit of a plug for anyone who's like in the chat and in the comments and is interested in getting involved or curious about what we're up to. We do non-violence trainings almost every weekend, which is a very easy way of getting involved and learning about what's going on within animal rising without necessarily making a commitment. It's a nice way to get involved in community as well. I think even if you're not, yet ready to do direct action, there's still a place for you in animal rising, and there's a lot going on. And just to say as well, this weekend we're going to the Epsom Derby, and there's going to be disruption on the track. So if anyone is interested, you can check out the website. And there's also going to be like a fun alternative festival at the front as well for anyone who's not as interested or not yet ready for direct action. Hopefully it's going to be a really fun day, and tell all your friends, bring everyone down. It's going to be some
That's
running.
the race that's just called the Derby, is it? Just called it
again? Yeah, the Derby. Yeah.
Yeah. I've never bet on a horse race in my entire life, so it's just not something that I was ever interested in. Like even people who don't bet normally bet on the Grand National, don't they, through their work and all that kind of stuff. But I didn't do that. So Ronnie is busy doing his Bond villain.
I've got Misty. Misty wants to be the next Bond cat, you see. So
Yes.
she always
Orla, I
tries
just want
to
you
appear.
to die. Yeah, okay.
So she'll be discovered.
Right. Okay. Well, thanks everybody for sticking with us, and I hope you've enjoyed the conversation and got something out of it. Thanks, obviously, for our guests. We don't normally have guests, and so thanks very much for filling our screens for us. And Ronnie, we shall be back next week, won't we? Providing
we are still alive.